So, ladies and gentlemen, I often hear it being said that apparently there's nothing positive to say about South Africa, but I'm here to disappoint you today because there's a lot that's positive to be said. One of the key issues of the day is, will Cyril Ramaphosa, be kicked out of the ANC? Because let's be honest, without Cyril Ramaphosa, the ANC is pretty much dead. But before we get on to the main video of today, can I once again remind you, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, you know the drill, guys. And if you want to support the work that I do here, you're welcome to buy me a coffee. The link is in the description box below. So let's get on to the main news stories, and I've got quite a few of these for you. So the first one is Davi Roots issued an economic warning to South Africa. He says that the ANC is basically failing South Africa. He says the ANC's 4 pillars of failure are all linked to its Marxist ideology, which is stuck in the 1920s. He says that this can be summarized as the centralization of power, cadre deployment, which ultimately is based around incompetence and corruption. He calls the ANC's true ideology, we line our pockets. Now, he says this can be seen everywhere in the collapse in everything the ANC has dealt with, such as Eskom, Transnet, the post office, and the municipalities. He says all of these have been crippled thanks to the ANC. Now, local governments are in ruin, SOEs are drowning in debt, and national debt now exceeds 6 trillion rand, heading to 85% of GDP when SOEs are included. He says that ultimately the state is now a destroyer of capital, and so Davi Roots argues that the state has become South Africa's biggest obstacle to growth. And this is 100% correct, because the Marxist ideology is that the state will grow, not the private enterprises. And we were all shocked a few years ago when Cyril Ramaphosa admitted that it was the private sector that actually grew an economy and not the state. But let's be honest, he hasn't actually put anything in place that allows the private sector to grow. There are still 3 big major obstacles to growth. And the first is the protection of property rights, the allowance of free trade, and the stability of sound money in South Africa. Now, these alone could stabilize the economy. So if we just protect property rights, that'd be a really good start. But you see, you can't, because the ANC has its own politics, and that politics is wedded in its own 1920s dogma. So Davi Roots argues that without removing the ANC, he says that even the best policies will continue to be sabotaged, because to be honest, the ANC sabotages everything. So Davi Roots calls on voters to kick the ANC out and insisted that South Africans can fix all of our politics on our own if we just fix our politics. And by fixing our politics, he says, we just got to kick them out. We just got to ignore the state, get rid of the state, and then we can pretty much fix everything on our own. So I hear you say to me, ladies and gentlemen, well, you see, the problem is that the ANC will still govern until, whenever, and that might not necessarily be the case, because we know that without Cyril Ramaphosa, the ANC polls at less than 30%. The ANC is not popular. The only thing currently keeping the ANC in check is Cyril, and to be honest, the problem with Cyril now is that even people are getting hurtful with him, and the faith that they once gave him for Ramaphosa, well, it's all but gone. So, what's actually happened? Well, as you will recall, if you've been watching my videos, you'll recall that at an ANC councillor's roll call, Cyril Ramaphosa conceded that DA-run municipalities perform better than ANC-run ones, and he urged his councillors to learn from Cape Town and Stellenbosch. Now, I can see what's happened. Some speechwriter was probably trying to cheer people up and saying, learn from what other people can do, and you can do it, and you'll be better. But that's not the way it actually came out. The way it actually came out is that Cyril was basically endorsing the DA and saying the ANC were terrible, which, to be frank, is kind of true. Now, NEC members reacted with outrage to what Cyril said and called it political suicide. They argued that Ramaphosa humiliated councillors in front of the media and undermined confidence in the party and handed the DA a campaign weapon. And that's partly true, because John Steenhuisen almost immediately issued a mailer to everybody on the DA mail list and said, oh, look, Cyril endorses the DA, you should vote for the DA. I mean, that was great, John, if only everybody who actually voted read your mailers. But in any case, there has now been a very real conclusion to this, and that is that some of the ANC now want to remove Cyril Ramaphosa as the face of the party ahead of the 2026 election campaign. But as was noted in the Chippy Oliver's 2017 book, How to Steal a City, the ANC's corruption was endemic. You see, the fusion of ANC structures with state institutions has become very much the norm in South Africa as a whole. And Cyril Ramaphosa himself could be seen as choosing elite packs with cadres rather than actually reforming South Africa. The ANC has become structurally incapable of reform. So the idea that out of all these municipalities, that only the DA ones are not as corrupt as the ANC ones, that's not to say there is no corruption in DA municipalities, because like there's politics, there's always corruption. But we can see this demonstrated in the Auditor General's verdict. Out of 247 municipalities, only 25 got clean audits, and of those 25, 18 were DA run. Every metro except Cape Town has a concerning financial position, which basically means that the metro is bust. Now, Johannesburg tops the list for unauthorized expenditure at 2.76 billion and spends less than 1% of its budget on repairs. Now, for those of you who don't recall, Johannesburg's basically had a coalition government between the ANC, the PA, and the EFF. Well, since they kicked out the DA, like way back when. In any case, Cyril says that the ANC has a 90-day turnaround to save face. He says that the ANC has imposed a deadline on councillors that within 3 months they must fix water leaks, potholes, streetlights, sewer spills, refuse collection, vandalism, and housing backlogs. I mean, that's quite a tall order for 3 months, bud. And he says that failure to do this will have harsh consequences. But critics say that this is just electioneering, not serious reform. And we see this every single time we get closer to an election. Suddenly, all the political parties fix all the issues that you've had for the last 5 years and then ask you to vote for them. And this is basically what this is. But the reality is that in many of these areas, the degradation is now so severe that 3 months isn't enough. So the likelihood is the ANC is going to get pummeled. And when it gets pummeled, many will turn on Cyril Ramaphosa and blame him for the electoral failure. And this isn't really going very well for Cyril, because whilst all of this kerfuffle is going on, Cyril is also facing renewed scandal from the Phala Phala saga. And this is all as the man who stole the money is currently being charged with theft, and he's currently testifying as to what's going on. Now, in the latest update on this, a man testified that he was paid $30,000 in fresh dollar bills to chauffeur the robber, the mastermind, Mr. David, and the cash was handed over in a shoebox. And I must say, these people are just so retarded. Imagine being able to identify an individual because he's paying people in freshly printed dollar bills given in a shoebox so that you can have a personal driver. I mean, who the hell thinks like this? You got 10 million rand and you're going to get a driver. For what? It's like money stolen. These people are cooked in the head. This is why these people are just retarded. In any case, that individual, the chauffeur, described trips to Rustenburg and Johannesburg where the stolen cash was allegedly laundered through car purchases and even exchanged at casinos. And vehicles were handed over with ribbons but bought outright with cash, and this appeared in the scheme to money launder the cash and somehow get rid of Cyril's dollars but have some kind of asset in return. And then if your idea is to do it through cars, that's pretty stupid. But in any case, the chauffeur's course testimony clashed with his original police statement. In one version, he met the thief by chance at a motor show. In another, they pre-planned everything, and prosecutors are accusing him of being a hostile witness who's hiding the truth. But in any case, the trial keeps Cyril Ramaphosa's farm scandal alive in the headlines and undermines his credibility domestically and abroad. And we can all see this now. You see Cyril's appearing in the news every day, and it's all for the wrong reasons. So Cyril, to a large degree, is becoming a liability to the ANC. You know where else we can see this? We can currently see it in the South Africa-US trade relations. And this is the sanctions and the tariffs being imposed by the Republican Party and Donald Trump. Now, as you will know from my video yesterday, there is a second bill. There's a second sanctions bill. And this new bill in the US Senate mirrors one already passed through the House committee stage. It demands Magnitsky-style sanctions against ANC leaders and accuses South Africa of siding with Russia, China, and Hamas, and of making anti-Semitic attacks against Israel. Now, as you know, there are high-profile targets, and all of these are basically coming out of the Zondo Commission's evidence, which names 95 ANC leaders, which includes the Energy Minister, Gwede Matashe, who could face sanctions. Now, a list of corrupt ANC cadres has been compiled under US law, but the list is currently confidential. But we can all kind of assume who those individuals are going to be. Now, as you know, trade with the US has collapsed because of Trump's tariffs, now 30%. And this has hammered South Africa's exports to the US, with car exports to the US dropping by 65% in the first 4 months of the year. Steel and machinery have also collapsed, and some agricultural exports, that's fruits, nuts, and prepared food, have held up, but we don't know what the long-term effect will be on agricultural exports given the ongoing tariffs. Now, the Trade Minister, Parks, is in New York trying to meet Donald Trump's envoy, Jameson Greer, with South Africa offering key concessions to the US, such as allowing the US to import more chicken and pork, and even loosening BEE rules. But I've got to say, I've read the news of this loosening of BEE rules, but I'm really not sure that there is actually BEE rules being loosened, because when we hear the ANC and they give us their little chirp in the media, they say they will not compromise BEE. It's a key policy of the ANC government, and so Donald Trump must do one. But then we read in the next news article that apparently there are some potential BEE exemptions for US firms, and possibly even changes to South Africa's land expropriation laws. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to say. But in any case, what we do know is that Trump has slashed aid to South Africa, expelled South Africa's ambassador, and accused Pretoria of genocide against white farmers, and granted US refugee status to Afrikaners and ethnic minorities. And so ultimately what we do know at the moment is that relations between the US and South Africa are now at the lowest it's ever been in decades. And if this continues to hammer unemployment numbers, well, the ANC's days are, well, pretty much numbered. But I think we can all agree following this video that the ANC's days are numbered, full stop. So moving on to the last news article of the day, and that is that within just weeks until the G20 summit, South Africa still needs 153 million rand to fund the G20 in Johannesburg. Now, Treasury and sponsors are scrambling to find the money, but MPs warn it looks chaotic and embarrassing. So we're getting all these G20 countries to come here. The whole idea is that we're going to somehow tell them they need to invest in South Africa. And in typical fashion, the ANC couldn't organize a piss-up in a brewery, and so it's going to make us look, well, rather amateurish, and like the place isn't really a place you want to invest in. And this can be seen most noticeably in the infrastructure nightmares around Johannesburg. Roads around Sandton and Nasrec are all in disrepair, signage is inadequate, water quality is suspect, and airports are overstretched. With opposition MPs asking what tangible benefits ordinary South Africans will see, poor citizens cannot eat brochures. Now, Trump has refused to attend the G20 and is instead sending the Vice President J.D. Vance, with the NEC chair suggesting that the US had to be convinced not to make the tactical error of skipping the summit completely, since South Africa will hand the G20 presidency to Washington. Now, a Chinese scholar, a would-be a Chinese scholar, has dismissed Trump's absence as irrelevant. He told South Africa to stop chasing Western approval and deepen ties with China and the global South, and to recognize the superiority of the Chinese model. He compared China-Africa trade at $30 billion to the US-Africa trade at just $90 billion, and portrayed America as a declining empire. But you see, this is the problem. So China tends to buy resources and sell us stuff, whereas what Africa wants to do is to manufacture stuff and sell it abroad. And China isn't that market. China is an export market. They want to buy minerals to export stuff that's been made. Africa wants to make stuff. They've got their minerals. They don't just want to be a mineral exporter. They want to be a manufacturing hub. So the type of trade that Africa wants, China does not provide, but the US does, because to manufacture things in the US is very expensive. So the US is more than happy to invest in manufacturing goods in, say, Africa, and exporting those at a cheaper cost to, say, America. It just makes sense. Now, what you can take from that is that the comparison between trade isn't the same. But you see, China often deals with really stupid, uneducated diplomats who don't understand that. So for South Africa, the G20 is supposed to showcase global leadership, but instead it is now highlighting fiscal weaknesses, weak infrastructures, and geopolitical marginalization because of all the issues that are ongoing. I gotta say, this isn't looking good. Now, in other news, looking at China, Russia, and India, well, what we can see is that according to the latest news, there has been a degree of fallout from those countries following the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Because of following the assassination of Charlie Kirk, it is now being suggested in the media that Russia, Iran, and China have flooded narratives with over 6,200 mentions in just a week, and they've all been blaming the assassination on various key issues relevant to those countries as a whole. So, these include Russia falsely blaming Ukraine, linking it to Kirk's opposition to US military aid. Iran has apparently accused Israel's Mossad of orchestrating the murder, and China is spreading lies, according to the media, that the shooter donated to Trump's 2020 campaign, and so that Trump needs to go because he's the problem. In any case, what we can see is that all of these countries are attempting to inflame US divisions and portray the West as weak and redirect blame onto adversaries, because that's exactly how they all work. Now, Trump's administration says that they are going to shut down the US Disinformation Counteragency in April, leaving the country more exposed to manipulation. But the reason he says he's shutting down the US Disinformation Counter Network is because he's saying, well, it effectively spreads disinformation. It's doing the very opposite of what it's meant to do. So how he's going to counter the disinformation given by Russia, Iran, and China on American issues is beyond me, but you can let me know what you think of that in the comment section below. In any case, that's all the news for today. Until next time, bye.